Namaskar. In this episode of Dil Se, we're going to talk about a highly sensitive subject. Sensitive, why? Because Indo-Canadian relations have taken such a downturn because of certain allegations made, not just by the Canadians, but also by the United States of America. And there is an element of hypocrisy in that. Now, what is that hypocrisy? We've known in the past how the United States and many other countries have forayed across borders, picked up people, brought them into their own country, and prosecuted them. We've also known of instances where they've gone outside the boundaries of their own country and done things about which they make allegations against us. But the geopolitical situation has changed. Before the Cold War, of course, India was extremely close to Russia. And at that point in time, our relations with Canada, even though both of our countries were part of the colonial empire, even though we respected each other, but the relations were not that good. And if I remember correctly, in 1948, Canada said there should be plebiscite in Kashmir. So throughout the Cold War, Pokhran won. Canada opposed it. Naturally, the West opposed it. Pokhran too as well. So when the economy opened up and the Cold War was over, the situation changed. The situation changed. Why? Because our economy became more liberal. We have open borders. People who come and invest, which was not so prior to what Narasimha Rao ji decided. And so the situation globally had changed. And the best period in our relationship with Canada, I think, was between 2006 and 2015, when our relations were on the upswing. Then recently, and I'm talking about very recently, in 2023 and now 2024, things have taken a downturn. Now, there are two aspects to it, and we're going to discuss this at great length. One, that the Sikh community in Canada is about 2%. There were about 770,000 Sikhs in Canada, and their representation in Parliament, Canadian Parliament, is 4%. And with the collaboration with the minority government of Trudeau, which is the NDP, or which a Sikh is a leader, the Canadians rely upon the minority community to win in some areas, and therefore they pander to their concerns. The other problem is that India has had a lot of problems with separatists in Canada, and we know how in 1984 and in the 1980s, how they supported the separatist movement. And even as recently as the farmers' agitation, they were supporting the farmers' agitation. And India is extremely peeved about that, and we've been telling them that, look, there are X number of about over 25 extradition requests that we have made, and they don't take them further. So in this context, what is the situation on the ground, how it's going to play out, and how India-Canadian relations and India relations with what are called the quote-unquote Five Eyes, how they're going to play out, are matters which we are going to discuss today. And we have three extraordinary people here with me. One is Manish Tiwari, an old friend of mine. He did his law from Delhi University. He did a bachelor's from Punjab University. His father was a renowned author of Punjabi language. Unfortunately, one fine morning, way back, the terrorists assassinated him. It was a real tragedy. His mother was a professor at the institute in Chandigarh. And he's been a member of parliament now, and this is the third time. First from Ludhiana, thereafter from Anandpur Sahib, and now, of course, from Chandigarh. Which only shows that wherever you go, you get elected, not from one constituency. It shows your popularity. Right. And he is a prolific writer, right? Especially in the context of defense, in the context of international relations. I don't think in the Congress party there is anybody who is as prolific as him in subjects of this nature. So thank you very much, Manish, for being here. Vivek Kachru, again, extremely distinguished diplomat, joined the service in 1975, and he is an expert in the area of this part of the world, namely Afghanistan, Iran, Myanmar, and all these areas. And he was our ambassador to Myanmar, Afghanistan, Thailand, if I'm right. And he was at one point in time, was the Joint Secretary of the Iran, Pakistan, Afghanistan division. So he is enormous knowledge. And of course, nowadays, Vivekji, I keep reading you in the Indian Express. You're a contributor, and I read your articles with great, great interest. So thank you very much. I'm sure you're going to help us understand the problem. And of course, my old friend, most important, Bhashwati, who is here with me. And she's been a friend for a long, long time. She's from Miranda House, across the road from St. Stephen's. And you know, you should have been in politics because you were president of the Miranda House student body. I don't know why you joined the Foreign Service. You should have been in politics. You would have been a great success. She joined the Foreign Service in 1976. And she is a European expert in European affairs. If you want to know about anything about European affairs, go to Bhashwati Mukherjee. And I watch her on TV channels. And in her distinguished career over 38 years, she has headed for the longest time ever the MEA's department specializing in European affairs from 1998 to 2004. And she was our permanent representative to UNESCO from 2004 to 2010. And before that, you were in the permanent mission to the United Nations and a 6-year tenure as Chief of Staff to the United Nations Human Rights Commission. But her real interest lies in the forgotten children, the cause that are very close to your heart. And I'm sure that you, and of course she's an author of 2 books, one of which I would like to name, Bengal and its Partition, An Untold Story, and the most recent, The Endangered and Their Root. So thank you very much, Bhashwati. So let's open this discussion and start with you, Manish. What do you think is going to happen?
Well, things definitely do not look good. The fact is that we have a large diaspora in Canada, going back to 1896, when the first migrations from Punjab took place, which then picked up speed around 1906, a decade later. And there is a very large Indian community, not only from Punjab, but from across the country. And so therefore, this current turbulence in the relationship unnecessarily impacts not only Indo-Canadian relations, but this huge diaspora, which substantially is peace-loving, people who've got absorbed and assimilated into Canadian society, and like all immigrants, want a better life for themselves, a better life for their children. And so therefore, this is, by all standards, something very unprecedented. And the fact is that the Canadians, now going back all the way to the early 80s, have unfortunately not been sensitive to India's security concerns. This is not the first time the expulsion of diplomats has taken place from Canada, Indian diplomats. It happened in 1989 also. But this is the first time when you've had a Prime Minister personally make so much of a song and dance about it. And a lot of people are attributing it to the upcoming elections in Canada and the fact that the Trudeau administration is not doing too well. So therefore, insofar as Canada is concerned, there is definitely a political angle to it, which cannot be discounted. But insofar as the United States of America is concerned,
but it's connected, no?
It's a different ball game altogether, because unfortunately the United States, seems to have far, far more evidence which they have put out in the public space, which does not really augur well for us. And as the trials will play themselves out, and nobody knows this better than you, there would be embarrassments along the way. And so therefore the challenge really is, how do you insulate the greater relationship between India and the US from the fallout of whatever is the legal processes which will play themselves out. And as insofar as Canada is concerned, well, at the moment the relationship seems gutted.
But it's true, but incidentally in this program, we don't ask questions, anybody can intervene at any time. Vivekji, I am a little more concerned because even if, the Canadian relationship takes a downturn, unfortunately for us, the evidence that is available in the United States even relates to the assassination of Nijjar.
Kapil, you would know the validity of that evidence far better than I would. I don't know whether that evidence, which is in the indictment of, say, of Yadav, would be admissible in a Canadian court of law. But certainly the Canadians seem to have at least no evidence which they presented to a court of law as yet. They have 4 boys, Indian boys, in their custody. They seem to be of a criminal, quote unquote, allegedly criminal bent. The Canadians have had them for some time, but they haven't, to the best of my knowledge, the case hasn't proceeded against them. It seems to me that the Canadians diplomatically took a step which is totally unprecedented in my experience, calling an High Commissioner a person of interest in a criminal matter.
That's true.
And then saying that we want to question you and lift him, and asked India to lift his immunity. It's never done. It's simply not done.
That's true.
And Trudeau said as much in his press conference that, well, if we were asked, we would also not do the same. So then why ask? So the relationship with Canada is in a very difficult stage, and the onus for this clearly lies on Canada. Besides, the Canadians have been very sanctimonious. They haven't given visas to Indian service personnel serving in Kashmir, defense service personnel. They haven't given visas to Indian intelligence people who served in Canada a long time back in our mission and who have children, their family there. They seem to believe that they have the right to be intrusive. And that's not how the diplomatic game is played. Now, you've said, you mentioned the American case, and I entirely agree with Manish. The American case is far dicier for us.
Because Vivek, there's an interconnection between the two, and that's what I'm worried about.
As of today, you would know this better, but as of today, the Canadians are saying that we have evidence, but they haven't produced that evidence publicly. On the other hand, the Americans
Have produced
it. They produced 2 indictments which are there, and apparently there are 2 sealed indictments.
Right.
Which are also there. So
correct,
we don't know
correct,
what they are.
Correct.
Now, there's one thing which we're talking of sensitive things, but ye dil se hai, so we can
No, we
talk
should.
straight.
Aman.
You see, as far as the Americans are concerned, they were able to get hold of a person.
Yes.
They got hold of him abroad. He was there for a year. They then extradited him. So they have him, and you would know this again,
Yes,
both of you being eminent lawyers, but that once you have a person, then it's no longer hearsay. It's evidence from him, at least of matters that he knows. The Canadians don't. My last point here would be that the Canadians strangely came to us and said, look, we have intelligence. Much of that was given to them by their Five Eye allies.
Yes, correct. That's correct.
Right?
That's correct.
And they then asked us that please convert this intelligence into evidence.
Yes.
Now, who does that?
No, of course, there's no question about doing that. But unfortunately,
Yeah.
and this is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Now, they have Nikhil Gupta. with them. They call
Yeah.
him Nick, right?
Yeah.
There's an Indian official involved. There's an allegedly Indian official who belonged to the CRPF, right? And then was sent on deputation.
I'm sorry, originally, yes.
Been sent on deputation.
Well,
That's what I'm only saying what the allegation is. That allegation may be right, may be wrong. I'm not on that at the moment. That's the allegation. So therefore, and then there is a source which connects Nikhil Gupta with the official, and that source then is connected to the American counterintelligence agent, right, who is involved in all this. So there are these 4 players, and there are conversations between them which are recorded. And in fact, the alleged official who was urging Gupta to do the strike also talked about the strike in Canada, which is why I'm bringing this up. Also talked about the strike in Canada, and then at a later point said, look, we want you to do that strike in Canada as well. But then said, no, we don't need you anymore, we've done it ourselves. Right? There is also a screenshot of him with certain officials who are in suits, which are with the Americans, which are part of the indictment. My worry is that even if the Canadians do not have that evidence, I'm worried that this is going to lead to a lot of embarrassment, which we don't like to avoid. And Bhashpati, what is your take on it?
I'd like to present this matter in a slightly different perspective. Let's go back to the downing of the Kanishka.
Yes.
Let's go back to the clear evidence produced by Canadian intelligence who investigated the case of those who were responsible and whom the Canadians refused to indict.
Right.
In Kanishka, there were a large number of Canadian citizens who died.
269.
Yes.
Absolutely. And the refusal, unfortunately, of Trudeau's father, so it seems to be a dynastic thing against India in a way, to go ahead with the indictment indicates a double standard that you pointed out in your presentation, that while it's perfectly kosher to go after your enemies, whether crossing your borders or in a country far away, as was done for Osama bin Laden as an example,
Right.
it is not correct for smaller players like India to even think of doing the same, because international law is sacrosanct in one way for the big boys and not so for the smaller boys who are trying to become big boys. That's my first point. Secondly, when they named our High Commissioner, who's a professional diplomat of the highest integrity, Sanjay Verma, as a person of interest, it is very interesting what they later said he was supposed to have done. He was supposed to have continuously fed the Indian government, along with the other Indian diplomats who were expelled, with information about subversive activities being carried out by certain unfriendly persons of Indian origin and otherwise on Canadian soil against India.
Correct.
Well, I don't know about my colleague Ambassador Vivek Karju, but I have no hesitation in saying on your channel that I have done exactly the same thing as Ambassador of India to the Netherlands. I have
That's your job.
supplied to the government of the day, who happened to be actually External Affairs Minister Salman Khurshid, information about certain hostile elements sitting in the Netherlands plotting against the territorial integrity and sovereignty of India. I certainly supplied that information, and I am sure that the Canadians or the Dutch or the British or the Americans or any other country who has an ambassador in India would have no hesitation in doing the same, because that is our job as professional diplomats. That's the second point I wanted to make. Yes. The third point I wanted to make was, I am not worried at all about embarrassment, because Prime Minister Trudeau under oath had to confess that he had intelligence but no evidence. And therefore, he actually validated our argument that if you have evidence presented to us, which he did not. As far as the American indictment is concerned, Americans are not perfect in their indictments. They have, for instance, kept illegally in a small little place off the shore of Cuba a lot of persons allegedly involved in 9/11 who have never been given a fair trial, not been given their rights, have been tortured, some have lost their mental stability and are still being held there. Under those circumstances, I would very much question the veracity of the American system of indictment, and to say, as you two eminent lawyers sitting here, that their indictment, in my opinion, as a non-lawyer, doesn't sound good to me. Where is the hard evidence? And in any case, where is the evidence linking either of these two indictments with the state of India, with the government of India, with Indian diplomats or with Indian intelligence services? How do we know that these are not rogue elements? In every state there are rogue elements. There could be rogue elements. They have rogue elements too. And what is even more disturbing is information that came out yesterday, that there was information, intelligence fed to the Washington Post by the Canadians, and the Washington Post was informed, please do not publish it until Mr. Trudeau and his foreign minister, who has been calling for sanctions to be posed against India, until they have finished their press conference. This is, in my perspective, very unethical behavior. And I would reiterate the fact that just as Bishop Desmond Tutu said, that I will not eat crumbs thrown from the white man's table when he was suffering under apartheid, I would say as a professional Indian diplomat that I refuse that my country should be treated in any way inferior in international law to another just because our present GDP may be less than that country concerned. I would insist that international law is the same, in which case those who have committed extrajudicial killings in the past should come clean, and they should apologize to those countries where those extrajudicial killings took place. They should express remorse, and they should say that they violated international law. Why should they go after only one country without any evidence?
Yeah.
Is the position that I would take.
No, I think they're absolutely valid. I don't think that anybody can even defend what Canada did. I don't think anybody can say that the United States have been kosher on all these issues. They've done it in the past. I don't think that we can say that, look, the United States and the West doesn't have double standards. I think we're all agreed on that. And I don't think that Canada had the business to name a high commissioner to say he's a person of interest for what diplomats do all over the world, as you rightly said. But the question that still arises, the fact of the matter is they are the powerful countries.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about it.
No doubt.
They have double standards.
Yeah.
They will use those double standards against us,
Yeah.
and they'll try and pressurize us. The question is, as far as your question on the evidence is concerned, I don't think either I or anybody else should say at this stage whether the evidence is trustworthy or not, but that's something that will actually pan out during the course of the trial. But what I have in the indictment in terms of telephone conversations is quite damning, and to say the least will embarrass us if it comes into the public domain. The question is, the United States needs us. We should leverage our affinity with the United States to say to them that this is not the route to take, because we have a lot of common interests, and this is not something that should be raised. We are, in fact, the only players in this part of the world which is now close to the West in our collective effort to ensure that the Chinese expansion in the Pacific Ocean and in the Indian Ocean doesn't extend to such an extent that we are made enemies of the West, while we should in fact be permanent friends of the West.
Can I add something on that?
Yes.
I'd just like to say that the fallout is already evident, in the sense that there is a lot of public opinion in India which was doubtful of the utility of serving as the lone outpost of the West in taking on the Chinese in the Indo-Pacific, etc., if it's a non-reciprocal love affair. A love affair has to be reciprocal to be effective. Under those circumstances, this would
marriage
push...
doesn't have to be.
Doesn't have to.
That's
I
right.
agree with you. Under those circumstances, those who were in favor of a more balanced approach as far as the West vis-a-vis Russia and China are concerned, are now speaking out saying that if this is the way India's closest so-called strategic partner, the United States, is embarrassing us on a daily basis publicly, then it makes sense for India to balance itself, to go back a little backwards and maybe re-examine its ties with those countries with whom we were taking on for ourselves on one hand, I agree, but also as a close ally of United States. So as I said, a love affair has to be reciprocal. I have nothing to say about marriage.
Sir, there are some, I think, more fundamental issues which are involved. You see, unfortunately, now going back all the way to India's independence, you have your intelligence structures which are not grounded in law.
True.
The Intelligence Bureau does not have a legal architecture. The RNAW does not have a legal architecture. Your NTRO does not have a legal architecture. And obviously, there is no independent external oversight. And in fact, now going back to 2011, this is the third time that I have moved a private member's bill, whereby I have been arguing that almost every democracy across the board has its intelligence structures grounded in law, subject to external oversight. God forbid if you happen to get into a situation that we have got into, it would have been very easy for us to argue that, look, we have a very robust mechanism whereby we have our parliamentary institutions which exercise independent oversight on our agencies. Number two, they are grounded in a legal basis. So therefore, their mandates are very clearly defined in terms of what they can do and what they cannot do.
Correct.
The argument which is always extended against us is that, oh, we live in a difficult neighborhood and so therefore there has to be operational flexibility, there has to be operational autonomy. You cannot have parliament because politics is so polarized, actually watching over the intelligence structures. But politics is polarized in the United States of America also.
Right.
Politics is polarized all across Europe also. Politics is polarized in Asia also. So therefore, that is neither an argument here or there. In fact, for Government of India to be able to very strongly make its case that we are a responsible state, we do not indulge in such actions. If at all there is something which may have happened, at best it could have been a rogue element, and we have mechanisms to deal with it. It would have really strengthened our case. And so therefore, dehauss the hypocrisy of those who actually have been carrying out cross-border operations now going back decades. The fact remains that we are in a bit of a pickle.
I think so. What do you say, Vivek?
I'm a little confused with what Bhaswati said. First of all, there are no love affairs, Bhaswati, you and I know, between nations and states.
Not even with Russia.
It depends on interests.
It's
interests that govern. It has seemed to me that over the past decade or so, the government of the day decided that our interests coincided more with the United States than with say, Russia. And certainly, despite all the efforts at personal chemistry with the Chinese, we had Galwan. Today is an important meeting. Hopefully, things will improve. So, is it now the case being made for a rethink? And if so, is it your view that the government of the day went too far in its seeking a coincidence of interest with the United States? Because if you're talking that of love affairs and we can change, etc., then that is the drift of the argument that I'm getting, that we went too far and now we must withdraw. I think astute diplomacy demands that you don't go so far, and you'll agree with me, that you calibrate. So somewhere along the way, what you are pointing out is that that calibration got a little awry. I mean, that is the logic of what you've said.
Let me respond if you permit.
No,
No, sure.
if you permit me, I'll just
Yeah.
add something. When it comes to rogue elements, I have two problems. The first is that if in any government organization, and both of you have been ministers, if there is a rogue element, it shows a failure of the administrative oversight of seniors. There are rogue elements, but it does constitute a failure because there shouldn't be rogue elements. So the rogue element argument is a very dicey one. It cuts both ways. The MEA spokesperson has said that Yadav is no longer a government employee.
No
if-
longer, but was.
But was, of course.
Yes.
As he was confirmed as in the aviation research center
Correct.
in November last year.
That's correct.
And the government said so before the Central Administrative Tribunal.
Yes.
So, I know government works in silos and all the rest, but let's be very careful when we use the rogue element argument, because it's not such a simple argument to sustain. It opens up to scrutiny, both internally and externally. And we know that there have been various intelligence agencies in the past, we know we don't have to recount history, when they had put forward that, look, we've had these rogue elements for ideological reasons, etc., then the trust in them diminished very substantially.
So if I may just respond to first your earlier comment, I never said that we went too far in our decision to ally with the West and the United States. I firmly believe that that was a correct decision given the hostile neighborhood and given the fact that we needed to strengthen infrastructure, strengthen our defense forces, needed access to critical American technology. We did the right thing in doing what we did. I am saying that it would now appear that the strategic partnership that both countries said was very important to their individual core national interests, I am disappointed that it appears to be, in this particular case, non-reciprocal, because on a daily basis we are being embarrassed as a government, as a nation, as a people by selective leaks in the Washington Post, messages made, etc. It could very well be that the United States, which is going through a highly polarized presidential election, things may calm down once we know the results on 6th of November. As far as rogue elements are concerned, I just used the word perhaps. I never said there are rogue elements. There are rogue elements in the Western agencies, and there are rogue elements in various agencies across the world. We have no evidence as of now whether there is a rogue element or not. As far as Mr. Yadav's family is concerned, and Mr. Yadav himself, he has strenuously denied, and he is entitled to a fair and free trial. He cannot be judged guilty until he's had a fair and free trial, etc. So I'm not saying he's a rogue element. I am saying that the possibility of a rogue element cannot be ever ruled out. That's all I've said. I've not said he's a rogue element.
You know, there is another dimension to it. You see, the thing is that we are presuming and presupposing that the US administration is in some manner complicit in what is happening. Now, all of us are aware of the fact that the United States has a fiercely independent judiciary, and they guard that independence very zealously also. This is not something which came out of any US government or US administration inputs. The fact is that the person these gentlemen were allegedly interlocuting with happened to be a DA informer.
It's an
Right?
undercover agent.
So
he was,
therefore, the train of circumstances which spun off, I don't think was because of the US administration, but the cause of it is definitely impacting the relationship in a negative way. So I think we need to be very careful because the little that I understand the US system, even if the US administration would want to, for
They
the
wouldn't be
sake
able
of
to
a
do anything
strategic
about it.
relationship, try and do something, I don't think they will be able to do it. And what the US has been attempting to do, and both of you are very eminent diplomats, is to try and firewall the relationship from, unfortunately, what is playing out or what will play out in the judicial processes.
No, in fact, there's a far more serious issue to it. Let me tell you this. Let's now assume that this is a rogue element and that government of India is not involved, and we like to believe that government of India is not involved. Now, this rogue element, in the name of Mr. Yadav, contacts Nick Gupta, right? And he tells Nick Gupta, as far as your cases are concerned, don't worry about it. Right? Everything is fine. Nothing will happen to you again. This is all recorded, right? So, and then the fact of the matter is, why would a rogue element hand over $15,000 in cash, record it to somebody on his own? And I'll assume there are either somebody else who is also a rogue element behind him, of which we don't know, but there is something certainly working which ultimately resulted in all this. So we assume now government of India is not involved. We like to believe that. But the kind of indictment with the audio records and with the video would suggest that there were other people involved. Now, who those other people involved are, we don't know. And if, in fact, the gentleman belonged to the Government of India service at that point in time, the Government of India should have known what his credentials were. Why did he have to connect with Nick Gupta? And why should this rogue element be allowed to do all this? The problem is that the policies of the Government of India over the years, especially since 2014, have been somewhat proactive in many of these matters, and rightly so, because we don't want our security to be endangered by elements outside of this country. So we support that policy. But at the same time, if some rogue element is going to do a job like this, he should do it professionally. He shouldn't do it in a ham-handed manner.
Look, I for one have enormous respect for the Indian intelligence services. I think they play a vital role in the nation's security and safety, and as diplomats, Bhaswati and I have had the good fortune of interacting with them, and some of them are, they have among them some of the finest people you can think of. The question of oversight is a political question. I do know that in many countries there is oversight, and perhaps the day will come when we will have.
We should.
We will have oversight.
Yes.
What will deeply concern me is that even though we live in a world of double standards, the first attempt of any agency or in diplomacy in the conduct of international affairs is plausible deniability. Bhaswati, you'll agree with me. This is 101 of diplomacy. That you must conduct yourself in a manner that you don't expose it.
Correct.
And you never expose the country or the state to any embarrassment. Now, of course, the Americans have been embarrassed time and again. Gary Pass he was shot down. He was put on trial
Yes.
way back in, was it 60 or 61?
Yes.
The U2 playing. And there have been other cases. But that doesn't mean that we say that, look, this is part of the game. Either if that is the approach, that we'll say that, look, this is part of the game. This is the way the international system operates. Then we will be embarking on a new policy.
But we should have the clout to do that, to say that, that's part of the game.
I think, Kapil, if you permit me to say, countries have brazened it out.
Big countries.
No, big countries, yes.
No,
Powerful countries.
even I do think that we have the capability of saying that 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 for our national security interests, we'll do what it takes. But you then can't have it both ways,
Right.
in a plausible way.
Yeah, that's the problem.
You can't say that we are the world's largest democracy, we respect fundamental rights and civil liberties, and we are a good international citizen, and then say this. So I think we've got to make fundamental choices. I, for one, do believe that national security sometimes demands
We do what we have to do.
that you do what you need to do. I mean,
Exactly.
to
But that's
protect your
the-
interest.
that's-
But plausible deniability, Bhaswati, you will agree with me, should never
I
be
am
lost.
remembering 71. We did what had to be done. We used intelligence. We did what had to be done. We were given a certain time frame to liberate Dhaka. We did what it had to be done. So it's not as if in our path as an independent nation, we haven't done what had to be done. That's not the issue here. Here we are almost an emerged country, but we are confronted by the hypocrisy of the developed West, who try to sermonize and lecture us and try to hold us culpable without proof of breaking international law and embarking upon a policy of what they call extrajudicial killings, when in their history they have done much, much worse. So I agree with you that international law should be the same for all. In the Cold War, if you remember, there was a famous case of a man who stood in a queue. He was a Bulgarian spy who killed somebody with the tip of a poisoned umbrella. I still remember, I was in PMI New York at that time. Those were extrajudicial killings. Nobody lifted an eyebrow. We can't say that Bulgaria was a developed country. It was part of the rules of the game of the Cold War. But in India's case, we have not ever been accused of embarking on a policy of extrajudicial killings. But we have certainly, in our path as an independent nation, done what it takes to preserve our territorial integrity. In this particular case, for instance, I would like to make the distinction to my friend here, Mr. Tiwari, as he rightly pointed out, the bulk of the diaspora, Indian diaspora in Canada, does not support these fringe elements at all. I have a sister who lives in Vancouver, she's a Canadian citizen. She doesn't support it. So this fringe element is actually holding the Canadian Prime Minister to ransom, and in the process, the Canadian Prime Minister has, to quote him, gutted the India-Canadian relationship. My concern, like the Americans, is how to insulate the India-US strategic partnership, which is far more important, as far as I'm concerned as a professional diplomat, from the damage or the fallout of what Mr. Trudeau is doing. He's doing what it takes to remain in power.
But the problem
That's
is, the Five Eyes have supported him. Actually,
Well-
unfortunately, whether it's Australia or it's New
In
Zealand.
the
But Sibyl
lukewarm
Sahib,
way.
you are aware, you've
And this argument of double standards can't win us the argument. That's the problem. You're right. There are
But
double
we have to
standards.
remember it.
But
That's all I'm
yes, but can it win us the argument?
It will win us only when we have the economic might of
And
the
your
United
Bangladesh
States.
example is not quite appropriate in this context, because there's a whole population in then East Pakistan.
No, I was saying it in the context of when we did
But,
what it takes.
Let me add something to what Bhaswati said. We need not go back to 1971.
Okay.
In 2019, after Balakot, we proclaimed a doctrine, what I believe was a doctrine of preemption.
Yes.
We said that if we see preparations being made for a terrorist attack against India, we reserve the right to take action which is needed to neutralize it. I'm paraphrasing.
Yeah,
That is what we said.
right. You're right.
Now, in Balakot, we took action against terrorist centers, and we immediately after that action, we said that we were not attacking Pakistani state installations, we were attacking terrorist centers. Now, there again, we were using conventional.
Right.
This is a dilemma that we have faced on account of Pakistan, which has acted in an abnormal manner all through. Now, the question arises whether we will extend this doctrine, and how will we extend it outside Pakistan.
Right.
The Canadians say that and the Americans too, if you see what the Attorney General has said after the indictment was unsealed,
Right.
there is no difference between what the Americans are saying and what the Canadians
absolutely
have said.
right. That's what I was trying to show.
Yeah, it's identical what
Yes,
they said.
yes.
So they say that, look, this is not kosher.
Yes.
Bhaswati is right when she says that they've done the same thing
Yes.
in other countries. But I do not recollect an instance where they've had to face an indictment in a foreign court. The last case that I recollect was in Pakistan. If you one of their contractors in
Yes.
Lahore.
Lahore.
Yes.
Lahore.
Yes.
That's right. Shot a
was-
man
was
in a
traveling
street.
and he was there was a chap two boys on a motorcycle, and I think from his car he shot them, and ultimately the Pakistanis lodged a case,
Yes.
and the Americans said he had diplomatic immunity. The Pakistanis proved that he had none. The matter was settled in court through the payment of blood money, which is something which is part of their legal system.
Yes.
Apart from that, I do not know of any case where a matter has been taken to a court of law,
Right.
like the Americans have done in this.
This is the worry.
So you are right. They practice duplicity, and we must condemn it.
That's right.
The same law must apply across the board to everyone. But you'll agree with me, Bhaswati, that the circumstances of each case are different. And therefore, the approach has to be different.
In this particular case, I'll just speak for 1 minute. I think Mr. Tiwari wanted to say something. In this particular case, what is more worrying is that the Canadian Prime Minister is complicit in a plot by a small fringe group to destabilize and fracture the Indian state while preaching that he believes in one India. He said it publicly that he believes in one India. But his actions give the impression that he supports the state of Punjab seceding from the Union of India to become a separate and independent state run by elements who have withdrawn support from his government, so that he does not have enough votes to pass his budget in February, and therefore he is pandering to them even more so as to be able to stay on in power. That for me is far more worrying, and the dilemma that poses then is, what should this great country of ours do to counter such threats now and in the future?
So what do
Can
you
they
think?
be done
What do you
conventionally
think?
or
But
extra conventionally?
let me make 2 points. You see, even when Punjab was extremely disturbed between 1980 and 1995, there was not even 0.1% support for secession. In fact, whatever may be the disposition of certain elements in Canada, it has no resonance in Punjab at all on the ground. Right? So, therefore, they live in their own echo chamber. They emigrated from India at a certain point in time when things were turbulent. And so, therefore, their conception of what India is unfortunately caught in that time wrap. We had largely ignored them over all these years, and so therefore they had become virtually irrelevant. The fact is that by the unfortunate circumstances which have played themselves out, you've made this fringe element, which is not only confined to Canada, but to various other parts of the world, unfortunately irrelevant for no rhyme or reason. And that should be a cause of worry for us.
My problem is that despite all this, despite what the Canadians have done, despite what Trudeau does, it's not going to solve the problem that we are facing. You may take any defenses you want of double standard or anything. The reality on the ground is that there is an indictment, there is evidence, there are conversations, there are videos. How are you going to deal with it? The best way to deal with it is to talk to the Americans and say, let's resolve this issue. How to do that? That's really a problem.
Well, my experience has been that
But
whatsoever.
Mr. Tiwari has mentioned it's not possible.
No,
because
no.
of the vigorous
I have a
American-
slightly, I have a slightly different take on this, based on some experience, not so much with the Americans, but with the Europeans certainly. Whatever they may say of judicial independence, etc., when push comes to shove,
Yes, exactly.
it all melts.
Remember the Italian?
I
Problem
agree
with
with
the
you,
Italian and the
Vivek, but
fishermen,
having dealt
and the
with the
fishermen on our
Europeans,
coast. What happened?
there is a big difference between the European judicial system and the American judicial system. So I have to say that Mr. Tiwari has a very valid point when he says that it's a fiercely independent system, but it's also a system that is pragmatic, and there can always be discussions on how to insulate the partnership, strategic partnership, so as not to push us into another direction. That is very true. In this particular case, I am convinced that there has been no wrongdoing on our part. I believe that it's being blown out of proportion because of the Canadian domestic politics. I do agree that it is very worrying that the Americans have got into it in such a big way with the indictment because they have a vigorous legal system. But I am sure that it is manageable till to now. It can still be
Which
managed.
one? The American or the Canadian?
Not
I'm
the
not
Canadian.
worried.
I'm
not
talking
worried about
the
the
Canadian
Canadian.
cannot be
If
managed.
the fallout
American
of the
one.
American trial is going to be on the issue of the
That,
assassination of Nijar.
there, I'll have to
This is-
naturally
This is a problem. This is, I'm telling you,
bow
a
to
real
your
problem.
superior legal
It's a real problem. It will have. Therefore,
Is
what
that,
happens-
will that be that indictment or the what is said in an American court of law, that would that be admissible in a Canadian
whether it's
court?
admissible or not
No,
admissible,
it's not
a
admissible.
No, I don't know.
let's not be too sure.
told it's
There's a huge embarrassment internationally for us. You must understand, when this comes to light, it creates a problem within the country, it creates a problem outside the country, and it creates a problem in our relationships with the most important partner of that we have today. So let's sort of end this discussion by saying, nobody can be convinced on what really is on the ground. We'll see what happens, but I think that our country should stand together to make sure that we are all together in this and somehow use our diplomatic skills to resolve this issue.
And if you permit me to add one sentence, we should remain proud of our intelligence.
Absolutely, absolutely. So thank you very much
Thank you very
for this absolutely wonderful conversation.